The woman worked as a waitress in a small roadside restaurant that most people barely noticed. The building was old, the paint was fading, and the sign outside flickered at night. Still, every morning before sunrise, she arrived on time, tied her apron, and started her shift with quiet focus. Life had never been easy for her, but she believed in doing her job with care. She wiped tables slowly, greeted customers with a soft smile, and listened more than she spoke. Many regulars liked her because she remembered their usual orders and never rushed them. She lived alone in a small rented room not far from the restaurant. The room had one window, a narrow bed, and a small kitchen corner. Most of her salary went toward rent, food, and basic needs. There was never extra money. Some months were harder than others, especially when work was slow or when prices went up. Still, she managed. She believed that as long as she stayed honest and kind, life would find its way forward. The restaurant owner was strict and watched expenses closely. Leftover food was usually thrown away at the end of the day. The woman often felt uncomfortable seeing good food wasted, but rules were rules. She had learned long ago not to argue too much. She simply focused on surviving one day at a time. One evening, rain started pouring heavily. The streets outside turned muddy, and the wind grew cold. Business was slow that night. Only a few customers sat inside, trying to escape the rain. As the woman wiped a table near the window, she noticed two small figures outside. They were standing under the weak shelter of the restaurant roof, close to the wall. They looked thin, wet, and tired. At first, she thought they were waiting for someone, but minutes passed and they did not move. She glanced again and realized they were children. A boy and a girl, both no older than 10. Their clothes were old and too big for them. The boy kept his arms around the girl, trying to protect her from the rain. The girl's shoes looked broken, and her feet were muddy. Something tightened in the woman's chest. She had seen poor people before, but there was something about the way the children stood quietly that caught her attention. They were not begging or knocking on doors. They were just waiting silently. She walked back to the kitchen, pretending to check an order. Her mind was restless. She thought of her own childhood, growing up with little but learning early how hunger felt. She knew that look in their eyes. It was not just hunger. It was fear mixed with hope. She looked at the clock. Her shift would end in 2 hours. She checked her wallet. There was barely enough money to last the week. Helping them would mean skipping her own meal later. She stood there, thinking, while the sound of rain filled the room. The restaurant owner passed by and complained about the weather and low sales. The woman nodded quietly. She waited until he walked away. Then she made a decision that felt natural, even if it was risky. She prepared 2 simple meals using her own money. Nothing fancy, just warm food that could fill a stomach. She placed the plates carefully on a tray and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but she reminded herself why she was doing this. She stepped outside, holding the tray close to her chest to protect it from the rain. The children looked up at her, surprised. Their eyes widened when they saw the food. She spoke softly, afraid of scaring them away. She told them they could eat inside where it was warm. The boy hesitated at first. He looked around, unsure, as if expecting someone to stop them. The girl clutched his sleeve. The woman smiled gently and stepped aside. She did not rush them or ask questions. After a moment, they followed her inside. She seated them at a small table near the corner. She placed the food in front of them and told them to eat slowly. She turned to leave, not wanting to make them uncomfortable. But before she could step away, the girl whispered a quiet thank you. The children ate carefully, as if afraid the food might disappear. The boy kept glancing around, still nervous. The woman stayed nearby, pretending to clean tables, keeping an eye on them. After a while, the girl looked up and asked if she could take some food for later. The woman nodded without hesitation and packed a small portion quietly. When they finished eating, she brought them water and a clean napkin. She finally sat across from them and asked simple questions. She learned that they had lost their parents a few years earlier. Since then, they had been moving from place to place, relying on kindness when they found it. They had no fixed home. The The woman listened without interrupting. She did not ask too much. She knew some stories were painful to share. Instead, she told them they were safe for the night and that they could return any time they needed food. When it was time for her shift to end, the rain had slowed. She walked the children to the edge of the shelter. She gave them the packed food and reminded them to stay together. As they walked away, she felt a strange mix of sadness and warmth. She did not know if she had done enough, but she knew one thing. That night, 2 children would not sleep hungry. She returned to her room later than usual, tired and soaked. She skipped her own dinner and lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her stomach growled, but her heart felt calm. She did not know that this small act, done without witnesses or reward, would one day return to her in a way she could never imagine. For her, it was just another night where kindness felt more important than comfort. The next evening, the woman arrived at the restaurant as usual. She tied her apron and went straight to work, but her mind kept drifting back to the 2 children. She found herself glancing toward the door more often than normal. She told herself not to expect anything. Life had taught her that people come and go. Still, a quiet hope sat in her chest. The rain did not return that night, but the air was cold. As the evening grew darker, the restaurant slowly filled with a few regular customers. Plates clattered, orders were called out, and the smell of warm food spread through the room. Everything felt normal yet different at the same time. Just before closing time, she noticed movement near the entrance. 2 familiar figures stood hesitantly by the door. The children had returned. They looked cleaner than the night before, though their clothes were still worn. The girl held the boy's hand tightly, as if afraid he might disappear. The woman felt relief wash over her face, but she kept her expression calm. She walked toward them and greeted them softly. She asked if they were hungry. The boy nodded, still cautious, but there was less fear in his eyes this time. She brought them inside again and seated them in the same corner. She paid for their food quietly, the same way she had before. This time, she sat with them for a moment. She asked where they had slept the night before. They told her they had stayed near an old building where other people sometimes gathered. It was not safe, but it was familiar. She listened carefully. Her heart felt heavy hearing their words, but she did not show pity. Instead, she spoke gently and reminded them to eat slowly. She made sure they were warm and comfortable. Over the next few days, the children began to appear regularly. Sometimes they came together. Sometimes only one came, explaining that the other was looking for small work or help elsewhere. Each time, the woman made sure they ate. She never asked for money. She never told her coworkers. She knew some people would not understand. She learned small details about them without forcing conversation. She learned what food they liked, which seat made them feel safe, and how the girl liked her water filled to the top. She noticed how the boy always waited for his sister to finish eating before taking his last bite. At night, when she returned to her room, she thought about them. She worried about their safety and wondered what future waited for them. She had no power to change everything, but she held on to the belief that small help still mattered. One evening, the restaurant owner noticed the children sitting in the corner. His face tightened with suspicion. He asked the woman who they were. Her heart raced, but she answered honestly. She said they were hungry children and that she was paying for their meals herself. The owner warned her not to turn the restaurant into a shelter. He reminded her of the rules. She nodded and apologized. After he walked away, she feared that the children might not be welcome anymore. That night, she explained the situation to the children in simple words. She told them they might not always be able to eat inside. The girl looked down, her hands shaking slightly. The boy clenched his jaw but said nothing. The woman felt a sharp pain in her chest. She promised them that even if they could not sit inside, she would always try to help. She packed food for them to take away and gave them extra bread. She also gave them clean napkins and a small bottle of water. Days turned into weeks. The woman continued helping quietly, always careful. She sometimes met the children outside instead of inside. She learned to watch the owner's mood and choose the right moments. One afternoon, the children did not appear. She told herself not to panic. But when another day passed with no sign of them, worry took over. She imagined all the dangerous possibilities and struggled to focus on her work. On the third day, she finally saw them again, but something had changed. They were accompanied by a woman from a local support center. The children looked nervous but safe. The woman from the center explained that someone had reported the children's situation. Help had arrived sooner than expected. The children would be placed in care where they could attend school and have a safe place to sleep. The waitress felt relief and sadness at the same time. She was glad they would be safe, but the idea of not seeing them anymore hurt more than she expected. Before leaving, the children hugged her tightly. The girl whispered that she would never forget her. The boy looked her in the eyes and promised he would remember everything she had done. The woman smiled and told them to be brave. She watched as they walked away, holding hands once again. That night, the restaurant felt emptier than ever. The corner table stayed unused. The woman cleaned it slowly, wiping it again and again. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Days became routine. Years began to pass. The children faded into memory, but never into nothing. They lived quietly in her thoughts, a reminder that kindness, even when brief, could leave deep marks. She did not know where life would take them. She did not know if they would ever meet again. She only knew that during a short time, their paths had crossed for a reason. Time moved forward quietly after the children left. The woman returned to her daily routine, waking up early, walking to work, and standing on her feet for long hours. On the surface, nothing had changed. The same tables, the same customers, the same narrow room she returned to each night. But inside her, something felt different. She often found herself thinking about the children during slow moments at work. When she wiped the corner table where they used to sit, her hands slowed down without her noticing. She wondered if they were warm, if they were eating well, if they were sleeping without fear. Sometimes she imagined them sitting in a classroom, holding books instead of empty plates. These thoughts brought her comfort. Years passed, one after another. The restaurant changed owners once. The menu changed. Some regular customers stopped coming, and new ones took their place. The woman stayed. She was no longer young, but she was strong in a quiet way. Her hair began to show signs of gray, and her back hurt more at the end of each shift. Still, she showed up every day. Her life remained simple. She never married and never had children of her own. Some people asked her if she felt lonely. She usually smiled and said she was used to her life. The truth was, she carried many stories inside her. Some were painful, some were warm. The children were one of the warm ones. There were times when money was tight. Sometimes she had to choose between fixing something in her room or buying better food. She learned how to stretch meals and save small amounts. She did not complain. She believed that life tested people in different ways, and this was hers. On rare days off, she walked through the neighborhood market or sat in the park, watching families pass by. She liked observing people. It reminded her that everyone was carrying something unseen. As the years went by, the memory of the children became less sharp but never faded. She no longer expected to see them again. She assumed they had grown, moved on, and built lives far away from her small world. She hoped they were safe. That was enough. One evening, after a long shift, she returned home exhausted. Her room felt colder than usual. She made a simple meal and sat on her bed, rubbing her tired feet. She thought about how quickly time had passed. 15 years felt like a blink, yet also like a lifetime. The next morning began like any other. She woke up before sunrise, washed her face, and prepared for work. As she stepped outside, she noticed something unusual on her street. A car stood parked near her building. It was unlike anything she had seen there before. The car was large, clean, and shining. Its dark surface reflected the early light. It looked expensive and completely out of place among the old buildings and uneven road. Neighbors stood nearby, whispering and pointing. Some thought it belonged to a visitor who had taken a wrong turn. The woman slowed her steps. She felt a strange sense of curiosity mixed with discomfort. She wondered if something bad had happened. She looked around, unsure whether to continue walking or return inside. As she stood there, the car door opened. A man in neat clothes stepped out. He looked around carefully, then checked something on his phone. A moment later, another person stepped out from the other side of the car. The woman's heart beat faster. She had no idea why, but she felt that this moment mattered. One of the strangers noticed her and asked politely if she lived there. She nodded, confused. He asked if she was the woman who had worked at a small restaurant nearby many years ago. Her breath caught for a moment. She answered yes, still unsure what was happening. The stranger smiled, but there were tears in his eyes. He said they had been looking for her for a long time. The woman felt dizzy. She held onto the railing near her door for support. Questions rushed through her mind. Had she done something wrong? Was this about the restaurant? About something she had forgotten? Before she could speak, the other person stepped forward. When the light fell on his face, something deep inside her stirred. His features looked familiar in a distant way. Older, stronger, but familiar. He spoke softly and said words she never expected to hear. He thanked her for feeding 2 hungry children many years ago. Her eyes widened. Her hands began to shake. She looked from one face to the other, searching for the past in the present. Then she saw it. The same careful eyes. The same quiet strength. Tears filled her eyes as the truth slowly settled in. The children had returned. They were no longer children, but the feeling was the same. She covered her mouth, unable to speak. All the years she had wondered about them came rushing back at once. They told her they had grown up together in care. They studied hard. They worked harder. They never forgot the woman who fed them when no one else noticed. The neighbors watched in silence as the woman stepped closer, still unsure if she was dreaming. She reached out, touching one of their arms, as if to confirm they were real. She laughed and cried at the same time. Her heart felt too full for words. The luxury car behind them suddenly made sense, but it was not what mattered to her. What mattered was that they were alive, safe, and standing in front of her. She invited them inside her small room. They stepped in respectfully, looking around. Nothing had changed much. The same narrow bed. The same small kitchen corner. The woman felt embarrassed and apologized for the space. They shook their heads and told her it was perfect. As they sat together, the past and present met quietly in that small room. 15 years of distance disappeared in a single morning. The woman realized that the kindness she had once given without thinking had never been lost. It had only been waiting, and now it had found its way back to her. The woman sat quietly as the 2 adults spoke. She listened more than she talked, just like she always had. Their voices were calm, but emotions sat beneath every word. They told her about their early years after leaving the streets, how difficult it had been to adjust to a new life. Rules felt strange. Beds felt unfamiliar. Silence at night was the hardest. At first, they struggled in school. They felt behind and embarrassed. But each time they felt like giving up, they remembered her. They remembered the way she spoke to them without pity, the way she treated them like they mattered. That memory pushed them forward. The woman lowered her eyes, overwhelmed. She had never thought of herself as important in anyone's story. She had simply done what felt right at the time. Hearing how deeply it had stayed with them made her chest tighten. They explained how, over the years, they focused on learning. One found interest in business, learning how money worked and how to manage small opportunities. The other leaned toward helping people, working with community groups and social projects. They supported each other through failures and small successes. There were moments when life almost broke them. Times when they were close to quitting school to work full-time. Times when they felt lost and angry at the world. During those moments, they reminded each other of the woman in the restaurant. They told themselves that if someone could care for them without expecting anything, then life was worth fighting for. The woman felt tears slide down her face. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. She apologized for crying, but they told her she never needed to apologize to them. They spoke about the day they decided to look for her. It was not sudden. The idea had lived in their hearts for years. Once they were stable and confident, they began searching. They returned to the old neighborhood, asking questions, visiting places that held memories. Many people did not remember. Some places were gone. Finally, they found the restaurant. It had changed, but the corner table was still there. They spoke to workers, asking about a waitress who had once helped 2 children. Someone remembered. Someone pointed them in the right direction. Finding her home was the final step. They admitted they were nervous. They worried she might not remember them or might not want to see them. Standing outside her door that morning had been harder than any business meeting they had faced. The woman smiled softly. She told them she had never forgotten. They talked for hours. Time slipped by unnoticed. The woman forgot about work that day. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to sit without watching the clock. At one point, one of them stood and walked around the room slowly. He noticed the worn furniture, the old fan, the neatly folded clothes. He asked if she was happy. The question surprised her. She thought carefully before answering. She said her life had been simple and sometimes lonely, but she had peace. She said she believed kindness mattered more than comfort. The room grew quiet. Outside, the street noise continued, unaware of what was happening inside. They then spoke about the car outside. She laughed gently and said it made her uncomfortable. She told them she did not need expensive things. They nodded, understanding her completely. They explained that the car was not meant to show wealth. It was simply a way to reach her, a symbol of how far life had taken them since those hungry days. They asked if they could help her now the way she had helped them then. They offered support, a better place to live, fewer worries. The woman hesitated. Pride and fear rose inside her. She had lived independently for so long. Accepting help felt strange. She told them she would think about it. She did not want to rush such a big change. They respected her answer. They said they were not going anywhere and that time was on her side. Before leaving, they asked if they could visit again. She agreed, her voice steady but warm. As they stepped outside, neighbors watched with curiosity. The woman stood in her doorway, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. When the car drove away, silence returned to the street. But her life no longer felt small. That evening, she sat alone and replayed every word. She thought about how the smallest actions could grow into something powerful. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was different. Not richer, not easier, but shared. And that thought stayed with her as night fell. The days after their visit felt different. The woman still woke up early and went to work, but her steps felt lighter. She caught herself smiling for no clear reason. Customers noticed the change and asked if something good had happened. She simply said life had surprised her. The 2 adults returned a few days later, just as they promised. This time, they did not bring attention or stand outside with the car for long. They parked farther away and walked to her place, respecting her comfort. They brought simple groceries and sat with her, talking like family. They asked her about her past, things she had never shared with anyone before. She spoke about her parents, about losing them early, about learning to stand on her own. She admitted there were nights she cried quietly, afraid of growing old alone. Saying these things out loud felt strange, but freeing. They listened carefully, never interrupting. They told her she was not alone anymore. Over the next weeks, their visits became regular. Sometimes they came together. Sometimes only one came. They helped her fix small things in her room, like the loose shelf and the broken light. Nothing felt forced. Everything happened slowly with respect. One afternoon, they invited her to see a place they wanted to show her. She hesitated at first, but curiosity won. They drove her to a quiet neighborhood where the streets were clean and calm. They stopped in front of a small but comfortable home. They told her they had prepared it for her, not as a gift to own, but as a place where she could live without worry. They said she could refuse, and nothing would change between them. The woman stood silent for a long time. Tears filled her eyes again. She thought about her narrow room, her tired body, and the years she still had ahead. Accepting did not feel like weakness anymore. It felt like trust. She agreed slowly, carefully. Moving took time. She packed her few belongings, each one holding memories. Neighbors watched with mixed emotions. Some were happy for her. Others were confused. She said quiet goodbyes and thanked the place that had sheltered her for so long. Life in the new home felt unfamiliar at first. The silence was different. The space felt large. But soon it became peaceful. She cooked meals without rushing. She slept better. She laughed more. The two adults made sure she never felt like a guest. They visited often, shared meals, and celebrated small moments. Holidays no longer passed quietly. One day, they invited her to the restaurant where they now met for lunch. It was not the old one. This one was brighter, larger. Still, when she held a spoon in her hand, memories returned. They told her that her kindness had shaped how they lived their lives. One focused on building fair businesses. The other worked to support children who faced the same hunger they once did. She felt proud, but not loud about it. Pride rested gently in her heart. As months turned into years, her health slowly declined, but she was never alone. When she rested, someone was always nearby. When she smiled, it was returned. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, she spoke softly. She said she never expected anything in return for her kindness. She said she only hoped the children would survive. They held her hands and told her she had done more than help them survive. She had shown them how to live. The woman closed her eyes, feeling complete. Her story did not end with wealth or fame. It ended with connection. A simple meal given long ago had grown into a family. And that was enough.